Thanks, everybody, for joining into this meeting of yqna. My name is Ed Hoare. Although I'm chairing the meeting, I'm kind of a stand-in chair. At least for now, I'm actually a former chair of yqna. So I'm kind of doing it for the moment. In the future, we'll see. I'll start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We pay tribute to their legacy and the legacy of all First Peoples of Canada. Today, the traditional meeting place of Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the communities that have grown in the treaty lands. I'm looking at an agenda which has been prepared really not by me, but in part by ULA, who is really the senior body and guiding genius of yqna, and some idea of the length of time yqna has been is it comes from the fact that it says on the agenda this is meeting 103, which I was a bit struck by. I was just kind of noticing that right now. In the agenda, which many of you may have seen, but perhaps some of you have not seen, there's an urgent message from ULA essentially seeking volunteers and saying that if some are not forthcoming, that it is possible that yqna after 22 years might have to fold. ULA, do you want to speak to that for a minute? I think your passion would come through you speaking much better than me trying to paraphrase you. Can you better
I did, yeah. All right. Yes, I want you to know that yqna has now existed for 22 years, and it started with 3 residents sitting in a Starbucks when the waterfront was still largely undeveloped. And we wanted to say in the future developments, and we definitely have had that with buildings and parks and designs of Queen's Quay. It was very exciting. And we had plenty of volunteers who worked with politicians, planners, developers, Waterfront Toronto, Waterfront BIA, Harbourfront Centre, the media, and many other civic organizations. And we learned a lot as the waterfront grew, and a lot of friendships were formed. And why is this so important now? Well, we seem to have reached an impasse in active membership. People are interested in our neighborhood, but we really need more people to pitch in. Our wonderful chair, Angelo Bertolas, resigned after 7 years, and we are still looking for 2 co-chairs to replace him. And it means each will have to chair 2 or 3 meetings a year and talk to the media as needed. And we also need volunteers to meet with Toronto Police Division, 52 Division, with parks designers at Waterfront Toronto, or support group for Harbourfront Centre. And we need a second person to join Liz McGorty at Foster. Foster is a coalition of downtown neighborhood associations. And we need a secretary to create minutes of our public meetings with the help of AI. So no expertise is really needed, just an open mind, and your ideas are always welcome. So this is my plea to you. If you want to keep yqna alive, do step forward and pitch in. We cannot take our existence for granted, and without volunteers we could fold. So write us at info@yqna if interested.
That's great. Thanks, ULA. I'll just put in my 2 cents worth. I joined yqna and I would say it was 10, 12 years ago or something like that. When my work became more of a sort of a at-home kind of a thing. And I just found it a terrific way to basically satisfy my curiosity about the neighborhood and how things work and what was going on. So I've had a wonderful time. I've ended up leading an organization called Waterfront for All, which has a somewhat larger scope. It's not confined to the immediate downtown area. It's more of the waterfront from one end to the other. And possibly could chair two different organizations, but it might be good to have somebody else or just join a committee if you don't want to take it on the chair. That would be great. Without further ado, I'm going to see if Ozma Malik is here, or representative.
Yeah, could I jump in with a couple of quick things?
Yeah.
One is, if anyone has comments or questions, please put them in the chat window. And you probably know this, but you just click the chat button at the bottom of whatever device you're on, and the chat window will open, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. And if you're having any audio tech problems, scroll to the top of the chat window, and I left a link in there that should help to correct them. So that's it, and we'll get going with Ozma.
Hi, I see Tom.
Tom.
You're speaking for Ozma. Okay. We welcome Tom. We know him well. He's been coming to these meetings for I don't know how many years. He's enormously experienced with waterfront politics and affairs. So go ahead, please, Tom.
Thank you, Ed. And yes, good evening. I hope my audio is working all right. And yes, so on behalf of Asma, the deputy mayor, she had been booked for a community consultation meeting for a development application tonight. So sends her regrets. And then I know there were a number of important updates that were requested that I'll touch on and be able to take any questions on that as well too. Just starting with Harbourfront Centre, and we are in the midst of the winter season here. I think what we've seen over the last couple of months is that there is a renewed leadership and sense of responsibility that has been taken on, and thanks to the yqna and Harbourfront Centre in terms of recognizing the real value of Harbourfront Centre as a campus in a community. And where that's taken us for this winter season was, of course, the really important work of restoring the skating at Harbourfront Centre that had been decommissioned over the last few years. And real credit to the organization here at yqna, advocates from across the waterfront who treasured the beloved pastime and advocated for its return. And so with Harbourfront Centre, and credit to them for being able to step up and find the way of re-implementing it in the midst of their campus. The deputy mayor was thrilled to be able to help close the gap in funding that was needed in order to restore it for this season. It was a successful launch just before the holidays, and I know I've seen it being used and enthusiastically there for the rest of the time. So very happy to have worked with you on restoring that, and thank you again. And again, it's also in the midst of, and I know Harbourfront Centre will touch on this more in detail, but the sense of emphasizing the need for Harbourfront Centre as an all-season resource, and including in the winter time, which we know has been a challenge on our waterfront. But the renewed Winterfest was really an amazing renewal of that effort, and I know that that's the first step in bringing back that type of programming for years in the future. I just wanted also to say that in terms of the ongoing collaboration and partnership with the community, that the commitment to a community liaison committee with the community representatives from organizations is something that Harbourfront Centre and ourselves are looking very much forward to. And so in the next couple of weeks, we'll engage with you on starting to set up that that process to begin that engagement and set a structure for regular meetings for feedback, ideas, and sharing of information as well. So on the runway and safety area requirement, as well, many of you will know, of course, in October, City Council gave direction on an option that City Council endorsed, and now the City, Ports Toronto, and Transport Canada are engaged in completing an amendment to the tripartite agreement based on that direction, which was to implement what was called RISA 1, Runway and Safety Area 1, which was the smallest, the most efficient, the most cost efficient, and the most expeditious option that was presented. So as of now, that work is continuing to finalize this agreement. The city is committed to working towards Ports Toronto's stated deadline for executing an amendment to the tripartite agreement, which was the end of January 2025. We're approaching that, and so that work is proceeding at with all the focus and seriousness that it required in terms of meeting this important safety obligation by the deadline that Transport Canada had set up. There was also ongoing consideration for the condition that an extension of the tripartite agreement in terms of the length of the term may be accepted if subject to our chief financial officer receiving the case from Ports Toronto that is required in order to meet financing to make that RISA requirement. So on to
any news on that last aspect, Tom? I haven't heard anything about it, about the 12-year extension, or what the state of the process on that issue is.
That is still in discussions between the ports and the city staffers as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Then on to the broader work of waterfront revitalization, which of course yqna has been at the center of for decades as well. Last council meeting in December, there was an endorsement of a package for the next phase of waterfront revitalization, because as we know, Waterfront Toronto started with seed funding from all three orders of government in order to begin the work of redevelopment, investment in our waterfront, development, public realm, and then continuing that process, starting in the central and east waterfront, and then now moving over into the Portlands and the recently renamed Okwemen-Minising Island. So that endorsement of a package is commitment from the city for funding for the infrastructure that's necessary to build out the housing that is planned in Quayside and also Okwemen-Minising, that will deliver thousands of units of housing, including rental and commitments to affordable housing. It's also a commitment for the funding of the parkland in Okwemen-Minising, Bidisiking Park, and the activation that's going to be set there. I know we're really looking forward to the opening of the lands around the renewed Don River, and this will allow for the completion of that work. It also allows for funding of the marine use strategy and further waterfront activations. So that funding is a commitment from the city, and of course, we all know that these projects require cooperation between governments. And there's active discussions between the three orders of government and commitments from the federal and provincial governments are being worked on right now. And so we're listening for that and expecting and optimistic that there will be commitments to complete that soon. Within that, there was also an announcement of the city's rental housing incentive program, which allows for the kickstarting and completion of some of those housing projects in Quayside in particular. So what that does is it provides incentive-based structures for developers to be able to implement rental housing. And one of those conditions was to implement a certain 20%, at least 20% affordable housing. So with that announcement, the Quayside development is on track to begin its first phases of work. The other element of that waterfront revitalization report was direction to look at dedicated bus lane on Queens Quay east of Bay Street over to Parliament Street, which would allow for, without reduction of the current road space or vehicular lanes, to have a dedicated bus lane to improve transit right in the immediate period, while we continue to work on advancing the light rail transit, which I know is an important project of the yqna. We're expecting a report to executive committee in this next cycle, and I know we'll be ensuring that you receive updates on that before it goes to committee. Then I just also wanted to touch, of course, on the theme of tonight's speakers, which have, the Bathurst Quay air quality study, and the credit to the BQNA, the Bathurst Quay Neighbourhood Association, in particular Joan, Prowse, under the leadership of being able to raise that study, organize it, bring it to a light, this information around the dangers of this particular form of air particulate, and the credit to the work of U of T and Dr. Evans and his team for this critical research. I know for the Deputy Mayor, it's essential that this work be the basis of any future negotiations around the tripartite agreement for the island airport and discussions around the airport master plan. So we're very happy to have heard, to be listening and hearing this information as well, which we are looking to support. So those are the main updates that I provided, and I can take anything else that you would like to ask.
There's a question here from Max. The airport is a money-losing operation. The Port Authority subsidized the airport by selling public property. For example, they got $100 million for selling property for a huge condo on Harbour Street. I think that might be to the commissioner's building. How much revenue the city received from Port Toronto's sale of this property? I think the answer, I think, is 96 million if it's referring to the old Harbour Commissioner's building and surrounding parking lot. So I think we'll move on, and thank you very much, Tom, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you very much.
Have we got Chris Glover here?
Is here.
My paddling buddy?
Yes,
Oh,
I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Hey, guys, nice.
lay it on us, Chris.
Sure. Okay. Thanks so much. And Ed, thank you for stepping into the breach here.
Yeah.
And Ula, I hear what you're saying. To everybody on this call, please, please, please step up, because we need the yqna. I was just listening to, all of the things that Tom was talking about that, Deputy Mayor Malik has been working on. There would not be a harborfront skating rink open right now without the yqna's advocacy over the last year and a half. So kudos to you guys on that. This air quality study, the BQNA took the lead on it, but the expertise, so much of the expertise comes from the yqna. I've been the MPP for 6 years. I am always impressed at the depth of knowledge at this table here and how much impact you've had on the planning of our downtown waterfront and making it, a really, really beautiful space. And so, please step up. One thing I'd be interested in with the yqna is, there's too many of us here with gray hair, and we need to get some young people involved in this. And, so maybe Ed and Ula, you and I, we could have a conversation afterwards, because there are a lot of young people who are interested in getting involved in civic issues. And maybe we need to, make a special call out to see how that can be done, and just start inviting people, see what the work that you're doing is here. Let's see. I'll just go through a couple of issues. These are issues that, have come up before. Most recently, on December 27th, the government announced a public consultation on redirecting the sewer, the combined sewer outflow at Ontario Place by the West Island. Currently, it flows on the outside of the breakwater. So when there's a huge rainfall and the combined sewer gets the sewers get overflowed, the raw sewage is actually flowing directly into the lake, which is really unfortunate. And the city is working on a long-term plan to address this. But right now, the sewage flows outside the breakwater, so it gets diluted in the lake and becomes part of the circulation of the lake. In order to appease Therma, the government is planning they need to extend the island, add another 10 acres on the east end of the west end of the West Island, and with fill, and that's right where that sewer is. So the city initially planned to extend that sewer further into the lake, but the government wants to be able to hand over the project to Therma by May of 2025. So that means that what they're going to do is a stopgap measure. They're going to actually cut the pipes short so that the raw sewage will be flowing inside the breakwater right by Ontario Place. So this is the lagoon. This is where the CNE water show takes place every year. It's just up, it's just down the shoreline from the Boulevard Club, from the marina, from the Sunnyside Beach. And we had a press conference this morning. We had Walter Kem, who was the landscape architect at Ontario Place for many years, designed the Bill Davis Trail. And he was talking about the insanity of this, because the breakwater was built in 1912, and there's gaps in it that are supposed to allow circulation. Those gaps, as the breakwater has been, eroding, those gaps have closed in. The west end, where the Humber River is on that breakwater, that's all silted up. And so the water there is not circulating the way it should right now. And so basically they're going to be pumping raw sewage, as he described it, into a bathtub. And it's an insane proposal, and it's potentially polluting the entire downtown West waterfront in order to accelerate this project with Therma. So we had a press conference this morning. I've got a petition on my website. I will try to add it to the chat here so that people can sign the petition. It's basically a petition to save the downtown West waterfront. And there's also a public consultation with the Environmental Registry Office, which is a branch of Infrastructure Ontario. I'll try to put the link in here. If I can't get it into the chat, because I'm on my phone right now, I will email it to Ed. And Ed, if you could distribute it to the community. In fact,
Yeah.
there's a good PowerPoint prepared by Ontario Place for All with all of the links in it. I'll share that with Ed, and if you could share that out to all the members.
Yeah.
And please.
And I thought I would mention as well that Waterfront for All, we're having a talk on this at 7 p.m. by Zoom on January 22nd.
Okay.
So we're going to have that presentation will be there. So the details are on the waterfrontforall.ca website.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, we need to get this information out there. We need to build, an appropriate level of public disgust about what they're proposing to do. Because basically what they're doing, Sunnyside Beach is probably, one of the most popular public beaches in the downtown area. And so they're planning on polluting this in order to build a private profit mega spa. It's just one more subsidy to the spa. It's an absolutely insane project. Let's see, I'll talk just briefly about a couple of other things that are happening. The bike lanes, that's an ongoing battle between the city and the province. It's inappropriate, obviously, for the provincial government to step in. This is clearly municipal jurisdiction. It should be a municipal decision. You know, for the province, for Doug Ford to be stepping in and you know, tearing up bike lanes in downtown Toronto makes no sense whatsoever, especially when there are so many pressing provincial issues. And I'd say the number one is homelessness. There's a recent report that came out that we've got 80,000 homeless. A government document that was released in the fall, in a footnote there, it said that there were 234,000 homeless. Whatever it is tens of thousands of people. It is a small city in the province of Ontario that is basically homeless. And there are more than 1,400 encampments. They're in every community across this province. They're a humanitarian disaster for the people who are in them, and they're also very problematic for the people who, you know, in the communities around them. We need to build housing. We need to deal with the opioid epidemic by providing treatment. And right now, you know, they had a bit of a public debate about involuntary treatment. You know, should people be able to be forced into involuntary treatment if they have an opioid addiction? That's not a discussion we need to have at this point. I have tried with 4 different people that I've met on the street, you know, in encampments, and I've said, if I could get you into a detox and a program, would you go? 4 have said yes, and I get on the phone and there's nothing available. And I've talked to some of the supervisors at the supervised injection sites, and they said they've given up on asking people, because if you ask people if they want to go into detox, you're building a false expectation, because there's not even a wait list. Like, you have to continuously phone until a spot happens to come up. And, you know, for somebody with an addiction who's fighting with an addiction, it just doesn't work. So we need a massive investment. Manitoba, the Wab Kinew, the Premier of Manitoba, just announced a program in Manitoba, and the goal is to bring an end to homelessness by 2031. And they're throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, at building, you know, housing, making sure that people have a place to go, that there's affordable housing, that there's supportive housing for people with disabilities and mental illness. And we need a similar plan here in Ontario. I'll just finish with a couple of other things. The holidays just finished. I want to thank all of the parents and, you know, students and staff at St. Mary's, Bishop, MacDonnell, Jean Lum, Market Lane schools. They ran food drives over the holidays, just before the holidays. And I was doing the pickups for those food drives. My minivan was full 5 times with food. It was all delivered to the Spadina Fort York Community Care Program, which is now feeding 6,000 people in our riding, including a number of different food banks. But on Wednesdays, they run a food bank at Waterfront Community Center. And it's huge there. If anybody's interested in helping out, you know, handing out some food or helping just to sort and stack the tables, you know, it's much appreciated. You can reach out to the Spadina Fort York Community Care Program, or reach out to my office and we'll put you in touch with them. I also want to thank the administration at the TCHC buildings in our area, and also the co-ops. We were able to deliver toys to 500 kids this year. And I got to dress up as Santa, and I was delivering toys. I had a Santa's helper out with me, and she was 9 years old. And she was very suspicious about me, you know, about whether I was the real Santa or not. And as we're walking from house to house, and she's coming with me, and there's, you know, a few of us, and I'm singing, he knows when you are sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he knows. And she stops me, she says, that proves it. And I said, proves what? She says, you're not the real Santa. And I said, why? What do you mean? She says, if you were the real Santa, you'd be singing, I know when you are sleeping. I know when you're awake. And I thought, oh my goodness, this 9-year-old kid's ready for law school. Anyways, it was lots of fun, and it was really nice to be out there. We've got a couple of events coming up. We've got a skate with Chris coming up at the Bentway skating rink Friday from 12 to 2. We've got free hot chocolate, apple cider. We've got treats. There are skate rentals and helmet rentals available. So if you haven't been on your blades for a while, come on out to the Bentway skating rink. If you've never been there, please come. It is an absolute gem in the city. It's just one of the most wonderful spaces to skate. Almost as good as the Harbourfront right beside the YQNA, I got to say. And then we've also got Community Recognition Awards coming up. So this is an annual a ceremony where we recognize people who have made a significant contribution to the community. The nominations are open. If you know anybody who should be recognized, please email my office and we'll provide you the application form. And I'll close it with that, but if there's any questions, I'm more than open.
Thanks very much, Chris. That's great. Have we got Kevin Fong here?
Do have a representative.
Is he here, Neil? Do you know?
It's Chris.
Or somebody from his office?
He's not able to make it as he had a previous he has a
Okay,
meeting. He had a meeting to attend.
okay,
But I am taking notes. There's not much update as we are basically awaiting for Justin Trudeau and the Liberal caucus to choose the next prime minister.
okay. I think we all know that. Yeah. Anything local to report? Oh, okay. So we'll leave it there and we'll move on, I guess, to our kind of main event.
Sorry, I was just muted. I guess I'm not
Sorry.
allowed to get.
Sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
As of now, there are a couple things local. I don't know if I can really speak about it as we had a team's meeting today, and but
Okay.
Something's happening where he's getting muted. I don't know what's causing that.
People are getting him. Yeah.
I've asked him to unmute. Sorry about that, Chris.
You want to try again, Chris?
hi, sorry. Okay, yeah. So
There you are.
there's a couple of action items. However, I think Kevin will give that information probably in the next meeting. It's mostly about I don't know. I don't think there is one, but about the safe injection sites, as Chris had spoken about. There's a couple of updates on that, but I think Kevin will be giving it in the next one.
Okay. Which is incidentally March 11th, as I understand. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. Have we got Joan Prowse and Dr. Greg Evans here? I assume they're here.
Here.
Are here.
There's Joan. Hi, Joan.
Hello.
Have we got Dr. Evans?
Hey there.
There he is. Okay. Greetings and welcome. Our next topic, as you probably mostly know, has to do with ultrafine particle stuff coming out of the island airport. And this is something which has been under study now for years by Dr. Evans and his team. Joan Prowse is the chair of the Bathurst Quay Neighbourhood Association. I've been working on and off with Joan for I really don't know how many years. It just seems like a very long time. And she's a very devoted volunteer down at the east end of the west end of the harbor. And Dr. Evans is a professor of chemical engineering and applied chemistry at the University of Toronto. He's got a very impressive list of awards, many of them teaching awards on his website. I think I counted 17, too numerous to go through right now, but very impressive nevertheless. He is the director, among other things, of the Institute for Studies in Transdisciplinary Engineering Education and Practice. And he is an expert on this area of ultrafine particles. So as I understand it, we're going to get a little introduction from Joan, and who will then hand it over to Greg. And then I guess they'll kind of go back and forth a bit, and we'll open up for questions towards the end. So take it away, folks.
Oh, great. So I just have a question. If do we have a bit more time now that the first part was a bit shorter, or I'm just trying to think?
Well, you know, we're I'm kind of thinking half an hour-ish for the whole thing. Is that sort of okay? 5 for you, 15 for Greg, 5 for general status and community, and 5 for input at the end. Is that ballpark going to work?
Yeah,
If not, we won't necessarily give you the hook if you go over, but you know, because we're nice people, so we wouldn't do that.
Yeah, we're good for time for what Greg and I are presenting. I just wanted to make sure if there was extra time that we could answer some questions from.
Yeah. Well, I hope so.
Yeah, because this issue is something that I had a lot of questions about. Back in 2013, actually, with the No Jets proposal, there was a need to have a health impact assessment study done by the City of Toronto, and the medical officer of health weighed in with his findings, and basically said that, you know, that the health of the community, it should be paramount over any incremental changes to or increases in airport operations. So with that in mind, I was the chair of the Bathurst Quay Neighbourhood Association at the time, and we reached out to, you know, the public health, and also to the Ministry of Health to see about getting some air quality testing done, because there was only, at the time when they were doing the data collection for the impact assessment they were doing, they only modeled data. They didn't actually go out and do samples. And we weren't getting anywhere. And I'm actually a documentary filmmaker. And as a documentary filmmaker, I'm quite, and a producer, you know, when I'm like a dog with a bone, is I need to find the answers. So 2 of my colleagues had just done a documentary with the nature of things, and it was called Something in the Air. And they had interviewed Dr. Marianne Hatzpulo from the University of Toronto, who was the co-lead, or is the co-lead with Greg Evans, of this study. And I reached out to her, and I reached out to my friend and said, could you give me an introduction to Marianne and her team, so I can see if they want to do a study. And luckily she was open to the idea, and I was really, really pleased, because for us, to have an independent study done of the air quality in our neighborhood, which ended up being a community campus partnership, was a breakthrough for them. As you'll see, there's a short little video clip that I'm going to show as an introduction to the study and the study's goals, in which Marianne will talk a bit about that. But anyways, we were just so pleased, because to have transportation research scientists doing actual collection of air samples in our community was a big first for us, and a big achievement. So we were quite proud of that. So I just want to, if you wouldn't mind, Neil, just rolling the video that I ended up making. There was a presentation on June 6th of the final results, and we put together a 15-minute video. So this is a 5-minute intro, and in it you'll see some of the community members, as well as Dr. Hatzpulo.
This is the Bathurst Quay neighborhood. Bathurst Quay is a high-density, mixed-income community. To the north is the Gardiner Expressway, and across the Western Gap is Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport. Planes take off from between 6:45 and in the morning and 11 o'clock at night. So sandwiched between these two traffic sources, it's little wonder that people in the neighborhood are wondering what about the air quality in the neighborhood where they live.
We face the airport, so we're one of like the closest units to the airport. And the amount of black dust that collects on the blinds and everything is it's quite significant. As I think too often in the city, we just assume, well, it's polluted because we live in the city. But I think where we are in between the airport and a major highway, I think we end up being a bit of a bowl for some of the air pollution.
This is not an appropriate place for the airport. We have too many young children. We have too many people who have health problems, issues. And the children that go to the school here are right next to the airport. And it annoys me, the added traffic, which is, oh, but it's so lovely to fly out. You're just a NIMBY, but it's not just a NIMBY, it's our health.
It's affecting the air quality, it's affecting the quiet enjoyment, it's affecting the communities, it's affecting people bike riding, listening to music. And it will continue to pollute our waterfront in every aspect. I'm Joan Prowse. I've lived in the Bathurst Quay neighborhood for more than 30 years. I'm also chair of our neighborhood association. Like a lot of people, we're wondering what was the impact of having an airport and a highway so close to our community. So we went on a search to find some answers. Hi, everyone. I'm Marianne Hinzalku. Fortunately, we found Marianne and a whole team of researchers at the University of Toronto and the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering. They launched a study of air pollution in the Bathurst Quay neighborhood, a community they identified as a transportation hotspot.
In 2019, Joan reached out and some other representatives from BQNA reached out and said, let's put together, let's bring people around the table, let's bring the airport, let's bring the city around the table, and let's actually try and investigate and see, are there any influences of the airport on local air quality in the neighborhood? Are there other sources of air pollution in the neighborhood from the highway? And let's try and understand what people in the neighborhood are exposed to in terms of air pollution. And also let's try and disseminate that knowledge, like what we're doing today, in meaningful ways, in ways that can help nudge policy, in ways that can help, facilitate meaningful conversations.
First of all, the prospects of working with the community and having a community-led study was very exciting. I think a lot of the times we tend to undermine the value of community input, especially in science. But communities are there and they are human sensors of that environment they're living in, and their insights are extremely valuable to the studies. It was also very interesting because I was very curious about regional airports, small scale airports, and highly close to local communities, and whether we could actually detect the influence of such an infrastructure.
I don't know how the streaming was for other people. It was a bit choppy, so sorry about that. If you want to see the full video, then I can put a link to where you can watch it from the University of Toronto's website. But anyway, the point is what came together, which was unique, and I think that Marianne, Dr. Hatzbulo pointed out, was that it was a partnership. So it wasn't just us hiring a group of researchers to, pursue a study for us. It was a scientific research study in which we actually had as partners around the table with us City of Toronto Planning, the Waterfront Secretariat. We had Toronto Public Health. We also had Ports Toronto, Billy Bishop Airport. And the way that the reason why we were, and I like to encourage this for other community organizations like the yqna, is that we have these contacts. I mean, I sat on the community liaison committee with Ports Toronto, so I had a connection right there. And I made a presentation about, you know, the need and the importance of this study, and they came on board. Similarly, we had relationships with our city councillor, with, you know, our MPP and our MP. So we also had government reps, and this really was exciting for the scientists. So we got funding from NSERC, which is the National Science, Engineering and Research Council, for the majority of the funding. And so that was also, I'm sure, because we had this novel idea of having the community, and the community acted as, and I'm going to talk about the community, I'm talking about the people that live here, but also the wider community, including our representatives and the city and the airport, to undertake this 3-year study. And its results are really interesting. So I just want to, first of all, thank Dr. Evans for coming. He's put together a fantastic presentation. And and after that, I'll just do a little follow-up just to say what's happened since, and see how you can get involved, and then we'll take questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Joan, and thank you, Ed, for that rather glowing, perhaps a bit excessive introduction. So I hope I'll be able to live up to it. I'm coming to you from Ajax, so this is actually Williams Treaty territory. So I just want to acknowledge that, and also wish everyone a happy new year as we enter the second quarter century. Boy, the years do fly by. So I'll share my screen. I have about 20 slides. I encourage you to ask questions on the chat. We'll try to answer as many we can. I'll try to walk through it, make sure everyone can understand, but if there's anything that's not clear, please do ask, because for me, the benefit of these meetings is hearing from people. It's answering questions, hearing perspectives. So I'll give you the presentation, but in exchange, I'm looking for questions. So let me share my screen. I believe you should be able to see it now. Can you see my mouse?
I cannot.
Not coming up yet.
Okay, we'll try that again. How about now?
There we are. I see.
Perfect. All right, that's wonderful. So just to build on the introduction that Joan gave, and yes, I do encourage you, if you're interested, get the link for that, the video. It's got some wonderful images on it. They didn't really come across when it was a little choppy. So I'll start with what we knew, tell you a bit about the study, how we did it, and really get pretty quickly into the results. And I will show the results to answer 3 questions, and then I'll wrap up. So airports are being recognized as a potential source of air pollution, especially for the neighboring communities. There's a range of emissions, but it's really ultrafine particles, which is a type of pollutant that I'll explain, that airports are being recognized for. And that's not just here in Canada, but there are studies coming out around the world. I've mentioned a few of the studies: LA, Amsterdam, Seattle, Boston. So this is an area of growing international interest. Typically, environmental assessments are done for airports, but these tend to only cover what we refer to as regulated pollutants. Those are pollutants where government regulations exist. That's not the case for new emerging pollutants like ultrafine particles, because there isn't yet enough evidence to support these types of regulations. And I'll come back to that as well. For Billy Bishop, for example, past environmental assessments have typically only looked at the regulated pollutants. And as Joan pointed out, they were done by modeling, so coming up with estimates as to how much gets emitted and how that impacts the surrounding communities. What we did is we wanted to focus on the reality on the ground in the community by doing measurements, and then extracting from that to where the sources are and which sources are contributing how much. Joan pointed out, it was in the video as well, that Bathurst Quay, and to similar sort of extent, your Quay are in an interesting situation in that to the north, there's a busy highway, the Gardiner. To the south, there's the airport. So there's a lot of different sources around them. And we went into this trying to figure out which sources are contributing which pollutants and how much come from these different sources. So we measured a wide range of pollutants. I've mentioned some of them here. Particulate matter smaller than 2.5 microns, or PM 2.5, is the one that governments tend to often focus on. And there's a lot of information about the health impacts of particulate matter 2.5 around the globe. It's the leading environmental cause of mortality, and about 8 million deaths a year globally are associated with exposure to PM 2.5. So it's quite well established as something that we need to deal with. Nitrogen oxides come from diesel vehicles emissions, and that's one we often look at when we're looking at traffic emissions. Ozone comes from reactions in the atmosphere. That's one that people used to concentrate on a bit more. There's still some issues with that. Carbon monoxide, hopefully all of you have carbon monoxide detectors in your homes. It comes from incomplete combustion. And I'm going to focus on ultrafine particles, UFPs. I'll try to remember to always say ultrafine particles. But this, and I'll explain what they are, this is a pollutant that tends to be associated with aircraft emissions. So we measured all of them, but the talk is really going to come down to the ultrafine particles and the links with the activities on the airport. So we measured lots, we looked at lots of things, but I just want to summarize where we ended up. There's also soot or black carbon, an important climate agent. I won't talk much about that. We measured a whole range of trace metals. We did this over several years. We were not planning for a pandemic in the middle of it. So we started out just before the pandemic, and we're able to keep measurements going thanks to the support from the community during the pandemic and during the recovery. So I'll only mention these on one of the slides. I'm really going to focus the data that we covered in summer of June, July 2022, because it tells the story just as well as these other data. We did measurements in a whole range of ways. We had monitors on top of the rooftops of some of the buildings. That's what I'm going to focus on. But we also had monitors in home from community volunteers and on balconies. We also had our mobile labs driving around. I won't focus on those. It's just too much to cover in a reasonable short presentation. All right, on to the measurement sites. So you know the neighborhood, so hopefully you're familiar with these sites. We had monitors at 4 locations in the neighborhood, and we tried to bookend the community, have one to the far south on top of the ferry terminal, or on a lamppost to the National Yacht Club, and to the North Arcadia. And that really covered the extent of the Bathurst Quay neighborhood. So we had either end of it. It didn't fully cover it geographically, but we could say either end. We also have a monitoring station that we helped set up with the Ministry of Environment Conservation as a park that's been operating for 9 years now. And it's fortunate in that it's on Hanlon's Point. And the reason that's important is that we do a lot of work, and you'll see this, that looks at identifying source based on wind direction. So when do we see concentrations go up? Which wind direction does that correspond to? So when the wind is coming from the south in areas along the waterfront, like your Quay, Bathurst Quay, you're getting relatively clean air for some pollutants that comes off the waterfront, and that includes ultrafine. So concentrations would expect to be low. until they run into something like the Gardiner Expressway. So we can measure the concentrations at Hanlon's Point to measure the concentrations in the clean air coming off the lake, and then to see how much higher they are once they reach the far side of the channel and they've passed over the island, including the airport. And so that's the approach that we use for a lot of analysis. A bit about ultrafine, and then I'll get to the results. So ultrafine particles are the smallest of particles. They're smaller than 100 nanometers. And this gives an idea of it relative to the size of a hair. They're tiny. They're much smaller than red blood cells. And because of that, they can get inside red blood cells, get inside our circulation system. And to use the jargon, they can translocate around the body and get found in all sorts of places. So they get found in organs. They've been detected inside placenta, for example. They've been dissected in brains. So they're so small, they do move around the system. They mainly come from combustion. Some come from natural sources, but in cities, it tends to be combustion sources, and some combustion sources produce way more than others, airplanes being an example of that because of the fuel they use. But they also come in from cooking, vehicles on the Gardiner, power plants, industrial processes. They're not a regulated pollutant in that there's not a standard that I can say if the concentration is above that concentration, the government will get concerned. But the World Health Organization has recently come up with what they call guidelines, and they suggest that high ultrafine particle concentrations will be if the average over 24 hours is greater than 10,000 particles per cubic centimeter, or over 1 hour, 20,000. So let me give you a bit more background as to what that means. You're all probably sitting in nice homes, fairly clean air, and the concentration of ultrafine particles in those homes is probably somewhere 5,000–7,000. And that means that every breath you're taking, you're inhaling 5 to 7 million of them. So they're all around us all the time. The question is how much? In terms of the health outcomes, there are studies. I saw someone posted on the chat a recent study by Scott Weichenthal, one of our colleagues, did an interesting study for Toronto, Montreal, looked at mortality, and they're associated with mortality by cardiac, respiratory, they're associated with neural, but I really want to emphasize the word associated. There's not enough evidence to show cause and effect yet. And for that reason, there's not enough evidence to impose regulations. And the reason for that is they're just not measured in a lot of places. So the evidence is growing, and it raises an interesting question of if we know that these are likely of concern, so many people, including myself, believe there's enough evidence to believe that they're likely of concern, and we just don't know how much damage they're causing. How long should we wait until we take action? The damage that's caused now cannot be undone. We get exposed to these pollutants over a lifetime, and it builds up over that lifetime. So really the question is, what should we do about it? How long should we wait? Other organizations are recognizing this. So there are emission standards for cars and trucks in Europe. We don't yet have those in North America. So they have emission standards for ultrafine particles. The International Civil Aviation Association is coming up with standards to limit how much gets emitted from planes. So organizations are aware of it. They're acting. The question is, how far behind is Canada going to be? So, 3 questions. Here's my first one. How do ultrafine particles concentrations on Bathurst Quay compare with other locations in Toronto? I'll show one slide. What we did is over the time June to August, so we were measuring continuously on the roofs of these buildings, going from the ferry terminal, which is closest to the airport activities, to Windward, to Arcadia, and we also measure continuously at our lab on College Street. There's two colors bars here, and what it's showing is the difference in concentrations when wind comes from the south. So travels over the airport and then reaches the neighborhood, versus wind coming from the north, travels over the Gardiner and then goes to the neighborhood. And the point there is that, yes, we wondered how much the Gardiner was impacting the neighborhood. And you can see from this, really, the concentrations in the neighborhood when the wind is from the north are really not much different than they are typical downtown location. However, when wind is coming from the south, the concentrations can be a fair bit higher. How much higher? Well, that brings us to the second question. Under which conditions do higher ultrafine concentration particles come in? Because Bob Dylan is coming into vogue again, interesting movie out. I've yet to see it, but I'll say the quick answer to this is it's blowing in the wind. So I'll throw that one out. And that's basically the answer. So it's a difference between, if we look at two locations that sort of bookend the neighborhood. To the south, we have the ferry terminal site. To the north, we have Arcadia. We made measurements during the daytime while the airport is operating. And you can see that there is a difference of about a factor of 3 at the ferry terminal and about a factor of 2.5 at Arcadia. So you get a substantial rise when the wind is coming in from the airport. To look at it a little bit more detail, and I think this will be about the most complicated slide, so bear with me. You imagined wind is coming over the lake, and it's relatively cleaner. It reaches our site at the south of Toronto Island at Hanlon's Point, and we measure about 10,000 particles per cubic centimeter. The wind then travels over the airport and over the channel, and then gets measured at the ferry terminal. And you can see the rise, and that's due to things that are between Hanlon's Point and the ferry terminal. And frankly, the only thing that is between them is the airport. The concentration then drops as it travels from the channel to Arcadia. And what's going on there is that as air pollutants travel, they get diluted by clean air, so the concentrations drop, and so they drop off as they go to Arcadia. Here's one other way to look at it. This is looking at results that we collected during the COVID shutdown. So we just happened to be measuring, doing the initial study in January to February 2020, right before the shutdown. And this is the concentration that we saw when the wind is from the south. So when the wind is coming over the airport, it's about 15,000. We then went into lockdown, and the concentrations were quite a bit lower. We went into recovery, and now we're back to where we were in 2022, and the concentrations have gone back up. So when the airport was not operating, the concentrations in the community were lower at this site, which is in the north of the community. All right. This slide is trying to give you an idea of what that exposure looks like. What would somebody playing in the park or in the playground experience? And it's showing results for June 2022. We're going from June 21st up to July 5th. This is what we call a time series. So we're continuously measuring the concentrations. The concentrations here on the axis are 5,000, 50,000, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000. You may remember that the World Health Organization's guideline was 10,000. So that's down here. So this is data from what it looks like on a typical downtown street in Toronto. In this case, it's College Street. This is measurements at exactly the same time made at Arcadia. And you can see, yes, some of the time it's quite similar. And you don't see these spikes. And that's when the wind is coming from the north. But when the wind is coming from the south, you get all these spikes coming up. You get sharp rises. And what these are the individual takeoff and land-ins of aircraft. So we managed to match the spikes to specific takeoffs and landing. If you go to the ferry terminal, now we're getting these spikes, and they're going up to 100,000, 200,000. These are high concentrations, but they're very short. They're for 3 or 4 minutes, and that's it. And then another spike comes along. This is very different than what we typically work with in air quality, where you average over a year, average over 24 hours. It's an area of emergent interest. I just saw a request for proposals from an organization in the US, the Health Effects Institute, that is saying, well, how do we begin to understand what happens when somebody is being exposed to, on average, a lower concentration, but then gets all these short-term spikes. And then the last one is that how much do different sources contribute to the ultrafine particles? So what we did is we looked at the wind direction, we looked at the different sites, we looked at how much of the concentration was in those spikes that we could tie to the aircraft, how much was present at Hanlon's, where it was the background air coming in, and we could put together a picture. So the first part of this picture is we looked at all those spikes. We looked at the takeoff and land-ins. We could associate each takeoff and land-in with a different type of aircraft. And we could see which types of aircraft were contributing how much. So yes, it's the Dash 8s that contribute the most, but there's many more of them. And frankly, they carry way more passengers. So if you were to argue it based on the amount per passenger, it would become a different number, but this is just how much is coming from those planes. It makes up 66% of the fleet activity, but it only contributes 57% of the ultrafine particles. Other types, so for example, the flight school contributes about, makes up about 6% of the flights, but contributes about 8% to the ultrafine. So they're contributing disproportionately. They're older planes. And you can see the same thing for the corporate travel, where they contribute fewer of the flights, but over 4%. So different types of aircraft contribute different amounts. Almost at the end here. The other thing we looked at was how much the ferry was contributing. Again, a bit of a complicated graph here. What we are looking at is the concentration of two pollutants, ultrafine particles, at the ferry terminal in red, Arcadia in blue. Concentrations here are going up to about 100,000. You can see these spikes, but the fortunate thing, or fortuitous, I guess, is that there was a change from the electric ferry that now operates. They had to operate the diesel ferry for a while, so we could see what the change was when it went back to the diesel ferry. And you can see that change too. You can see that when the wind is coming from the south, there was a lot more coming from the diesel ferry. And how do we know it's the diesel ferry? Well, diesel emits soot. We call it black carbon. And so we use black carbon as a marker for diesel emissions. And you can see how much the black carbon jumped up simultaneously when the diesel ferry started operating again. And we can match up those peaks there as well. So we have a good idea that this is coming from the diesel ferry. We can put that picture together of how much is coming from the planes, how much is coming from the ferry. how much comes in the air that blows in to the neighborhood from across the lake. So it's not that the air in the lake is perfectly clean. It contains about this amount here, which is about 9,000, depending on where you measure it, but it's about the same value everywhere because it's in all the air that's arriving in Toronto. We can see how much comes from the ferry. That's about 80%. And the remainder is how much has come in from activities on the airport. It may not strictly be the takeoffs and land-ins. There may be other sources there, but this is the difference between what we see at Hanlon's Point and what we see at these sites here, either the ferry terminal or Arcadia. Now, I should point out that we only measured at Bathurst Quay. If we'd measured at York Quay, it's a bit further away, but it would be similar sorts of story in that when the air comes over the airport and reaches York Quay, the emissions from the airport will be impacting York Quay. So, conclusions. How do ultrafine particles at Bathurst Quay compare to other locations? On average, if we take all the upwind and the downwind conditions, concentrations are similar to other locations in downtown Toronto, like busy streets like College. That may seem like a bit of a contradiction, that if it's the same on average as other places in Toronto, how can it be that the airport is contributing substantially? Well, it's because if the airport wasn't there, the concentrations along the waterfront would actually be lower as long as you're south of the Gardiner. When does it contribute? When the winds are from the south and the airport's operating, or basically, to more generalize it for York Quay, it's when you're downwind of the airport. And what's the impact of the various sources? Well, we looked at a range of sources. We looked at the parking, we looked at the ferry, we looked at a range of sources. And basically, for the ultrafine particles, when the wind is from the south, it's the airport flight and ground activities. So that's what I wanted to say. I think there's a few recommendations. The first one I think is the most important, that if we're dealing with airports, and it's not just Billy Bishop, it's all airports, ultrafine particles are the pollutant that is the best marker of the emissions, the pollutant we should be concerned about. And this exposure should be considered in the planning for any future changes to the airport. We cannot say that the existing situation is satisfactory. It does concern me. I'm sure it concerns the people who live there quite a bit more. Collectively, our city, community members need to look at the feasibility of adding additional ways to reduce this ultrafine particle exposure. And we need to put more pressure. So certainly I have been talking to federal politicians about undertaking research on the health impacts so that we can develop these regulations so that communities don't get caught with the idea that, well, we can't do anything because it's not a regulated pollutant, even though it may be causing serious problems. So with that, I want to thank everyone. We had an incredible crew of students. They did sampling around the clock. It actually takes a lot of effort to keep these instruments running. We're really, really grateful to the community, all the volunteers who volunteered their homes, let us have access to the rooftop. We're grateful to NSERC, who provided the funding for the study. And I'll point out that the results have been published in a fairly prestigious journal called Environmental Science and Technology. And it's been presented, it was last year at the Transportation Research Board conference in Washington, D.C. So, and people doing ultrafine particle research around the world are certainly aware of the work that's going on in Bathurst Quay because, well, we all talk to each other. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. and or we can pass it back to Joan, whichever you'd like to do.
Greg, I got a quick question. Did you show the slide that showed the distance of the buildings where the sensors were? Like how far Arcadia was versus Windward? I saw that in your pack. It was very last slide, just after the one you just. I can just answer if you want.
Yeah, I've got it here. No, I did not show that slide. So Arcadia is about 900 meters, Windward's about 800 meters, and the ferry terminal is closer, and concentrations drop down as you get further away from a source. So Arcadia is actually a fair distance from the source.
So I mean, there's a lot of questions. That was one of the questions that someone asked, is how close, what if you're like, what's the distance where you're measuring from? I just want to say that I was asked to speak about the reaction of our neighborhood when we presented the findings, and we had throughout the process, I mean, the research study spanned from 2019 to really release the final results in 2024. Because of the pandemic, there was a little bit of a slowdown, but we actually held 3 public presentations at different periods. And in January 2024, about the same time that you were presenting to the Transportation Research Board conference in Washington, we also had a public workshop, and there were 70 stakeholders. I mean, Greg presented, the whole research team presented, but also we had community feedback as to be similar to you looking at the presentation now and getting together and being able to discuss things that you didn't know, things that you'd like to see going forward. And overwhelmingly, they found that the presentation was quite good, and along the way that the whole keeping the community involved in an understanding about air quality, and that, what modeling is versus measured, results, duration, averages, what does averaging mean? Because that, as Greg says, that's where we're looking at things sometimes that are over a 24-hour period, when in fact, what about those spikes? And so that's a new area of research that's being looked at. Big concern and discussion about what are the health implications now that we know that these tiny particles show up in the bloodstream, and what can we do to protect ourselves? The idea that people didn't know that ultrafine particles are associated with aircraft emissions, and that there should be more testing for them around airports. And then also just in general, like, why don't we have standards yet? And that there's a critical need for there to be further investigation. So one of the key recommendations from our study is that there needs to be more testing done. We're recommending that they be done by independent researchers like the University of Toronto team, but they don't have to be the University of Toronto team, but they have to be, and I think having the community involved, because I don't know, Greg, we had meetings, we had committee meetings, every couple of months, where we looked at presentations and discussed things, and it brought some insight to the researchers as well, because they had the mindset of the community. What are the kinds of questions, like, this wouldn't be clear, this is how you can make it clear. So involving the community, I think, is important. And then also, how to get this information out. And I think that is the next step for all of us, not just us living in the Bathurst Quay neighborhood, because we've been working on this for 5 years, but for all neighborhoods along the waterfront, or even downtown neighborhoods, or other cities that are close to an airport. The 2 goals of the study were, one was to identify the pollutants and their sources, which is what has occurred with this. The second one was to use the findings to inform public policy and planning decisions in the future. And so that's a key goal, and it was agreed upon by all the stakeholders around the table at our committees with our elected representatives right from the very, very beginning, that this goal was really important. So we have some, public planning decisions that have taken place since this study was released. So it was released on June 6th. There's 3 reports, one report specific to the public workshop and the recommendations that came from that, but 2, you'll find more details on what Greg has presented. And I put a link to the U of T website where you can find the results of the studies, and you can watch the video. The thing is that this came out, the final results came out in June, even though we were making public presentations in January. Now, RISA, the runway and safety area consultations or public meetings started in July. So what we had hoped and how we participated is the BQNA made a public deputation to City Council, the Executive Committee of City Council, on October 1st. We also attended the public meetings that were held by Ports Toronto and by the City of Toronto. We all participated, as most people probably did, in a survey that was commissioned by the city to get people's input on what they thought the most important recommendations were for the city to consider, or the factors to consider when it came to making a RISA decision. And what came from that survey, which had 3,000 people respond to, was they thought this health and the environment was the number one factor to consider for City Council to consider. Sadly, and I just discovered this, so we made our public deputations on October 1st. I presented the air quality studies key findings and the response of the people to the City Council, the city's consultations. That was on October 1st. October 8th was when the actual results of the public survey came out from the independent research company, and it was given to Waterfront Toronto, who then gave it to the entire City Council, who voted the next day. So, I just find that this key time when our study could have been used to inform an important, very, very important planning decision or policy decision didn't have time. But what we do have time for is the environmental assessment process, which is going alongside the RISA presentations. So Greg and I, we participated in an interview with AECOM consultants about the air quality study. And also the BQNA participated in one on the community impacts of RISA. And then since the vote in which City Council decided to vote for RISA 1, we still have the results of the environmental assessment. So on October 15th, Ports Toronto presented their preliminary results, in which they recommended RISA 3. And I'm not sure how many people are up on what runway and safety areas and the differences between RISA 1 and RISA 3. But RISA 3 is much larger, much more expensive, would take more time. All the construction is going to be done overnight. So, it wasn't the, I think probably the least invasive option that was chosen by the consultant. So coming up, it's scheduled for December, but sometime early in this year, we will find out when the final environmental assessment results will be presented. And I still don't think it's too late to put in any concerns that you might have about the timing and the short time period we had in order to come up, to be consulted and to come up with our input, but also the environmental assessment itself, now that we know about this study results and the findings about the ultrafine particles. So that's something that's coming up in October. In November, just before Christmas, there's people on the call, by the way, that I want to recognize as the volunteers on the BQNA who volunteered countless hours. We never kept count, but many, many, many hours. You know, basically looking at reports, attending meetings, this kind of thing. So they, Diane Jameson in particular. So there's Diane Jameson, Beverly Thorpe, Leslie Monette, and Marie Monique Giraud. So Diane arranged for a meeting with us, with our city councillor on November 20th, basically to say, look, like we've been waiting now since March 2013 to have some action on that medical officers of health report that came out. We've, as a BQNA, have now gone ahead and, you know, did our own air quality study and our own testing. Now we have the results. What's going to happen? So I'll just give you the feedback from that meeting. They are, let's just see. So she said, well, okay, so they're going to be using the results of this Bathurst Quay Neighbourhood Air Quality Study results. They're going to be using it as City of Toronto to strengthen air quality discussion in the upcoming Airport Master Plan and tripartite agreement negotiations. Both of these processes need to be transparent and they need to be inclusive, and we've been promised that this is what's going to be, that transparency and inclusiveness, which means we're not going to be rushed through a decision to, you know, and we need to be consulted as public and provide our input and have it taken and having it included. And she's going to be giving us a general schedule and list of events so that we can plan for these next steps relating to these important discussions. I don't have any dates right now. We have a follow-up meeting that's currently being scheduled with our councillor and with public health. And in the meantime, OSMA is looking into any upcoming Board of Health agendas and upcoming work to see if and where the air quality study findings and the recommendations from 2013 are being considered or can fit in. She's also suggested that we reach out, or she's going to help by reaching out to environmental organizations to inform them about the air quality study findings and to fit them in any of their upcoming campaigns, and possibly to co-host an event with the BQNA to create more public awareness. So I think awareness, like, we're so happy that the YQNA invited us to make this presentation. It's super important. We need to get more organizations to approach. So if you're a member of a group, we're happy to come and make another presentation. We can do it in person. We can do it online like this. And also, Toronto Public Health is in the process of updating their adult chronic conditions dashboard. So we're still waiting for that to be updated. It was supposed to have been done by the end of 2024. When that comes up, we can actually look by neighborhood and postal code at chronic decisions that are linked to ultrafine particles, for example, like respiratory, cardiovascular, and respiratory conditions. So, and then, you know, just as, you know, we have a community around us. Arcadia is going to be, Arcadia, by the way, was one of the testing sites, as you know. But we have an art gallery, and we're very active building when it comes to getting involved in the community. So we're going to be hosting an exhibition in our art gallery from March 19th to April 7th. It's going to focus on, we're calling it A Breath of Air, and we're going to be looking at the air quality study. We're also going to be having a breather's corner, which is something like speaker's corner, where people can come in and record how they feel about the health, what they know, questions that they have for city council, for the people who are making the decision around the future of our community when it comes to transportation sources. And I think that's about it. I'm going to put in a link for the contact, if you want to contact our association, and also on our website, there's a number of articles that have been published about our response to the air quality study and updates since then. And the other thing I just want to mention too is Ports Toronto has a community liaison committee. yqna has members on it, and Hal Beck is very, very active in that. Public is invited to attend these meetings as well. And that's, kind of in a way, taking it back to the very beginning about how this air quality, how we got Ports Toronto to participate in the air quality study, was being members of the community liaison committee. So I'll end there, and then hopefully
that was great, Joan. That was a huge amount of follow-up information. So I'd encourage people. I was taking some notes, but I'd encourage people, if you missed some, put it in the chat, and Joan can follow up because I think there was a lot of very useful information. What I'd like to do, just bear with me. I did ask for questions. I got a huge reward. I got a lot of questions here. I'm going to try, if it's okay, Ed, if I just try to run through them.
Just run through, yeah.
Quickly. I know the night's getting on. So there's a couple useful links to various papers, but I would discourage people. We cannot start extrapolating based on single studies. There is a lot of emerging data in terms of the health effects associated with ultrafine. So yes, it's pointing the way, but I think there was one question: can we start to estimate mortality in Bathurst Quay? It would be a mistake to try to take a large study like the one that Scott Weichenthal did, which involves hundreds of thousands of people, and start extrapolating it to a small community. So we're not at the point where we can do that yet. I got another question about how far do things travel from the Gardiner. It's typically the concentration for pollutants that are what we call primary pollutants, where they come out of a source and then they just blow in the wind. The concentration halves about 200 meters away. So it's sort of 200, 250 meters away. The concentration will be half of what it was when it was emitted. It's more complicated with aircraft because they're in the air. They've got engines behind them. So that one's more complicated to work out. But as a rule of thumb for the Gardiner, about 250 meters, the concentration will be half of what it was when you're right on the Gardiner. The question of, do we have data for ground level? Because I mentioned this on the roof. Yes, we did make measurements at ground level as well, and the story is pretty well the same. So I just focused on the data that we have. We can't leave instruments around operating all the time at ground level without being with them, so we don't get as much data at ground level. There's a comment from Lawrence here that activity at the airport has increased since 2022. That's interesting. We can't do much about that now. There's a question about what can people do to manage the risk. It's very much based upon the individual. So how pollutants affect individuals is incredibly varied. It depends upon their health condition, depends upon their age. So you will know best what's best for you. If you find that leaving your doors closed in the summertime when wind is from the south is advantageous, then you could do that. Air filters are not great for ultrafine, but they're better than nothing. So I'm not plugging any particular type of air cleaner, etc. But if you do get an air cleaner, I would suggest one that just filters the air. Don't get a fancy one that has ultraviolet light or ozone, or they can cause all sorts of other problems. The one that just filters out, it's not really designed for ultrafine, but it'll still be useful. It still does a reasonable job. Bruce is commenting about winds coming from the east predominantly. Joan is the sailor. I mean, I don't think so. I think that's not what we see.
From the southwest, for sure.
From the southwest,
the predominant wind.
Yeah, that's sort of what we found, but maybe maybe you're measuring somewhere else, Bruce. So I talked about the air filter. What did we learn from results in Washington, D.C.? People are very interested in this study because it's one of the longer studies, longer set of measurements. And we did it in a very, very thorough way. So certainly our colleagues around the world are quite interested in this work. There is a lake effect. The question is, does Lake Ontario increase the seriousness, abundance of ultrafine particles? It's more to do with the wind. So again, for those of you who are sailors, you know that you will get the onshore breeze in the summertime at about 10 or 11 o'clock when the ground warms up and the air starts flowing from the south. So that's the major effect. It's not like other pollutants where it can sit and cook on top of the lake. And I think I've got through them all. Oh, sorry, Max, you've made an excellent point, and I thought I was tried to be very clear that College Street is not a typical location in downtown Toronto. It's a busy location. It's a busy street, and that was the comparison I was trying to make. So thank you for clarifying that. It's not a quiet neighborhood in Forest Hill, so that's different. The ferry terminal was the one at the island, and
the island
that's it.
Airport, the island airport.
Yes, the island airport ferry terminal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Appreciate all the questions, and I appreciate people staying on. If there's any other questions, you can get in touch with me or ask Joan.
Yeah, and I just before you start off too, is that the yeah, that was one thing I wanted to clarify, is that the ferry terminal is like down by the airport. There is a tiny terminal on the north side. We weren't able to go across the gap and test anywhere in the airport grounds. So that is another area that we'd like to do some independent testing on. And then the other thing that I remember Marianne saying to me is that when you did present in Washington, or when they did present in Washington, the thing that they were interested in about our study, not just the fact that it was long-term, was the fact that we had this background monitor, air quality monitor, which was at Hanlon's Point. And then we had the neighborhood they were studying, or the area that was being studied. And usually in between, there is a lot of other things. There's like industry, there's roads, there's a number of things. Here we just had one specific thing, and it was the airport. So that also makes it unique in the findings. So that was I found interesting.
Okay, that was fantastic, guys. Thanks very much. I guess I'll make a comment there. I'm a litigation lawyer, and I dealt with competing experts a lot. So I note that the summary that I got from you guys, it differs. The summary at Ports Toronto at the island airport seems to be very different. It seems as though it's in a different universe. It's basically saying, well, the particulate matter is really not any worse than anywhere in the city, and it's not a regulated thing, and so we shouldn't worry about it. So you're in the situation that's I'm quite used to, which is where you have a disagreement about the significance of a technical matter, so the way that, in my opinion, that has to be dealt with is that the city secretariat at some point, or some entity, is going to have to investigate effort by experts, some sort of independent expert, into trying to arbitrate who's correct, how much of a concern is it, and that should be part of a general inquiry about the future of the airport. We have time to do this because the expiry date right now is 2033. Apparently the process to sort of look at the feasibility of all these questions, I mean, is Porter leaving? So many questions about transportation, about efficiency, so, you know, what are the uses of land? There's so many things to consider, and I hope that they will be considered. This obviously needs to be considered as well. And that should be done, if it's going to be done through the island master planning process, then there needs to be a mechanism so that there can be competing experts. In other words, the experts can't just be ones retained by the airport folks. There need to be experts, incredible people who have serious input. This was the same thing I was saying in the Jets debate. In the Jets debate, we ended up having a peer review process run by Waterfront Toronto, where there was an independent firm hired, experts were going to look at it. Eventually it didn't complete because the jet thing went away. So I think these concerns are very serious, and I think it's ultimately up to the city to look carefully and with expertise, with the required expertise, at really how much of a concern this is, and to balance all of the many other complicated planning aspects that go into basically should there be a renewal or not. And of course, there's going to be people vigorously on both sides. So I still hope, and I've always said that I hope that that is the process. And I think it'll be invaluable if, you, Joan, are involved, and Greg, if you're involved, because you have so much expertise on this, and I think we really need to hope that there's an in-depth process that could come to really grips with these complicated and very important issues.
Well, can
So,
I just, I just want to tell you right now that I just found out on Friday a statement from Public Health and the city that they are leaving the air quality testing up to the airport.
I'm sorry, can you just say, I couldn't hear you.
Leaving the Ports Toronto, not Ports Toronto, but Public Health and the City of Toronto have said that they're leaving the air quality testing, future air quality testing, up to the airport.
Yeah, so that, and I don't know whether that's appropriate or not, because I just don't have the expertise. Greg, maybe you have an opinion, but I mean, my general view is it seems to be more debate about really what is the effect of the data is there. What does it mean? How much of a health concern is it? Is it objectively a problem or not? Or, if and so on. So that may be a concern or maybe not, or maybe you have the view that, they're going to tinker and it would be better if it were done by some other entity, which again would not be surprising. I used to deal with chemical cases where, you got other people, one side's doing their testing, the other side's doing their testing, and not surprisingly, they often didn't agree. And then the job of the court was to reconcile that and arrive at some sort of, sensible outcome.
Yeah.
So that may be a concern. I don't know.
Ed, I think those are great points, and I would certainly, I'm happy to hear that the airport will be doing testing. I don't think that should be the only testing, but it's really important for them to be able to monitor their processes, see if they change something, if it has an impact on air quality. So that's a positive step.
I would think that what should happen is that the airport should have its expert, and then the public somehow, either funded by the city or something, Waterfront Toronto or something, peer review or whatever it is, has their expert, and they both do separate testing if that's warranted, and they arrive at their conclusions, which maybe you would agree or possibly would not.
I'll just emphasize that we have had the research peer reviewed, we've published it, we presented it at conferences, we've made all the data that we have publicly available, and we certainly welcome increased discussion. I agree that there can be ambiguity on the interpretation as to the severity. People have different perspectives. There shouldn't be ambiguity in terms of what the observations are and what the data was reported, and so we have made ours, and I think there are statements that Joan has pointed out to me in the sustainability report that simply do not match what's in our report.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much. I'm sure we haven't heard the end of it, and that there'll be an ongoing dialogue. It's an important one to have, and we thank you so much for coming and telling us about it. It really was terrific and very informative.
Great.
We've got a few minutes left, and I'm gonna move on without more ado to Harbourfront Center. I don't know. Do we have Massimo, or who do we got here from Harbourfront?
We do have Massimo.
Oh, we do have Massimo. Okay, excellent. He's back from vacation.
Hey, hi, yes, freshly back this morning.
Freshly back, excellent. Okay,
I put together a little presentation. I've scaled it back, and I'll do my best to respect time here. So without further ado, share my screen. I've kind of lost everyone on the screen, so if you can just verbally tell me we're okay.
I can see it.
Okay, great.
It seems like you need to make it bigger or something, maybe.
Oh my.
Yeah. I'm seeing your whole computer screen, not the, yeah, there's, yeah, I think that's good, yeah.
Is that gonna work?
That's gonna work, yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, I'll bring us on through here as an update. I wanted to bring everyone through some of the winter festivities that we have just gone through for at least into the holidays. We're still in the winter mode. With Winterfest, Ontario Science Centre that started in December with us, the rink opening New Year's Eve, and if time permits, I do have some slides for upcoming programming. So I put together a few slides with some pictures to illustrate the activities that were on site, and I tried to put a video in. Hopefully, it comes through. The audio quality might be questionable. But this year, for the first time, Harbourfront hosted a winter fest, and it started on the 29th of November and ran to January 5th through all the Friday evening, Saturdays, and Sundays. For the first time at Harbourfront Centre, there was a 33-foot holiday tree that was put up at the center of the public square, the image to the right. The opening was terrific. We had a jam-packed area with all kinds of street food and vendors and food vendors that were supported by Street Eats Market. We also had some local artisanal vendors offering unique gifts. And we set up an urban tree lot, although it was a little smaller than we thought it was going to be, but it probably was well sized to the community, because live trees, are not necessarily allowed in all condos, but we did sell them, and it did offer a little bit of a flavor of the urban life in the city. And then we had train rides around the campus on those weekends for children. It was very popular. So there's a few images of if you had not made it down, what it could have looked like, and that was the train that was going around. So there was a lot of activities. There was s'mores, the free hot chocolate on the opening night. And that was our first ever holiday tree that I mentioned. So the Science Centre opened Kids Spark on December 4th. The Ontario Science Centre was their pop-up location at Harbourfront Centre. It runs till the end of April. Their tickets are on sale. There's a portal through our website as well for them. This is a first-time event for Harbourfront Centre. It's about 20,000 square foot installation activation along the whole northern part of our main campus. If you have not been in, they've done a significant renovation in there and added all these playful Step Inside Kids Spark program. What it's basically, you learn through a play experience for children up to ages of 10 years of age. And it has increased traffic quite a bit inside our building, which has been welcome. Then, of course, we had the return of the rink. So on December 21st, we had our opening. It was well attended. It was covered by media. It was all made possible with the support, as Chris Glover and Tom Davison has already mentioned. Without the City of Toronto Deputy Mayor Ozma Malik's office particular support, this would have not gotten the legs it needed. So I'm personally very grateful, but we at Harbourfront Centre, and I know the entire neighborhood, with the support of YQNA, has been tremendous. Really takes a village. This one took a village and some. So thank you. It was well covered by media. We had so many stories running on just about every network. It was refreshing, to say the least. And the collaboration was just terrific. And the WBIA has also stepped up in support with providing us with free skate rentals on all our DJ skate nights on Saturdays. That has seen over 600 skate rentals provided each weekend. I know Tim is not attending today, wasn't able to, but I'm sure he'd be jumping up and hooray right about now. That is a significant number. Just for those who might be wondering if that is a significant number, it is a very significant number. So very successful, and we hope to only make it bigger and better each year. And I've tried, and hopefully this works. Please speak up if it doesn't. I'll stop it and move on to the next slide. But I'm going to press play here, and hopefully it does. Yeah, so that hopefully that came through, but I thought that the video might be helpful to show the activity and people on site. It was very vibrant, and it was quite successful. And New Year's Eve was also a very terrific evening. The weather wasn't collaborating as nicely. We had a lot of rain, but it still didn't hold the crowds back. The City of Toronto had anticipated on upwards of 250,000 people along the entire waterfront, of which about 35 to 50,000 were expected to be at Harbourfront Centre. With our night market kept intact, the vantage point to see the fireworks from both barges was really well situated. CBC made their main HUD broadcast from Harbourfront Centre at our skating rink. And it was just terrific. They were going through all the different time zones through Canada and kind of going in and out of feeds. But it was really great to see Harbourfront Centre at the center of that. It was a great New Year's Eve party for those who were able to attend. The night market added, a little bit of food and kind of gave us a really different feel. It wasn't just there. I mean, it was across our whole property was at right all the way up to our Marina Key West, which was also a very terrific site where there was casts of live feeds on the silos. There was giant screens on our property and also along Music Garden. So there was a lot going on our waterfront that evening. So the City Toronto fireworks were spectacular. The people just couldn't say enough great things. So it was really quite beautiful. So that's kind of brought us up to where we are now. I have a thank you slide, but I think I might have a few more seconds. Am I good, Ed? No, okay, that's fine. If not, that's okay.
Yeah, just go. Can you whip us through whatever you got that's left?
Absolutely. It's just really programmatic. It's just to say, listen, we do have more things going on at Harbourfront Centre. Skating by the lake will continue to the February 15th. We are into a whole programming for Kumba in February. You can peruse our website for the many different things that are going on. I picked up a few highlights out of there. There's a rock harder, etc. And our craft and design has many programs. I counted over 70 from now to May 31st. So something that a lot of people might not necessarily track and know when we have these wonderful craft studios. But they're not just for the residents, students in use, but there's classes for people to take. Make your own simple earrings and jewelry, whatever it may be, glass fusing. There's so many different programs. I started extrapolating some of them there, and I thought they were worthy mention for folks looking for something to do. And last but not least, our summer camps are up and open for sale. Harbourfront is moving along.
Thanks so much, Matt. We're so pleased. We folks from yqna and so on have been, in to see you and Kathy Loblaw, the new CEO, and there's definitely a feeling of vigor and things kind of moving forward. And we really appreciate it, and want to thank you for your efforts. And we look forward to further fun stuff coming up. So thanks.
You're welcome.
We've got Tim Coker not here. He's from the Waterfront BIA. So we'll miss his rundown on what's going on in general. I would commend you to waterfrontbia.com is the website of the business improvement area. And it's actually really good. It's got some really good stuff. It's very nicely put together and a great source of information on just upcoming events and all sorts of stuff like that. So go have a look at that. We got Carolyn Johnson, treasurer, who is our financial whiz, and she is going to talk to us about the financial status of yqna and also some stuff that's going on at 200 Queens Quay West. Are you there, Carolyn?
I am. Hi.
Great. Good to see you. How are you?
Good. Thank you. And you? Good evening, everyone. First off, the future of the garage at 200 Queens Quay West is now demolition. They've started. I had a meeting in December with representatives of the developers, Kelly O'Hanlon from Diamond Accord and Jonathan Friedland from Lifetime Developments. I was very encouraged to hear that they are working very closely with the people at the Water Club, who are the most closely affected. I live in the building across the street and have a fine view of the roof of the garage, so I can see what they're up to. They've hired JB Priestley, which is a well-known demolition company, and they've made a start already. Their plan is to close Lower Simcoe Street this coming weekend, starting Friday, and take down a substantial portion of the west end of the garage right to the ground, and then they will be able to get off the street and keep all their equipment on what's left, been opened up on the site to working on taking down the rest of the garage over who knows how long. We don't have a timeline on it as yet. They had promised me a follow-up update once they'd had discussions with the demolition company and figured out the program, but I haven't had that as yet. So I'll keep you informed as on when I find out anything else. And the other thing I'm being asked to talk about is the finances, which we didn't have time for at the AGM. So I'd just like to share my my screen here, if I may. There it is.
I don't see it yet.
No, I'm trying to find the share. Sorry, I forgot to press share. There we are. Yeah, so I prepared this for November. That's really when I do the annual, well, the financial, sorry, the financial year, right? Runs from November to November because that's when we have our AGM. So you can see there, we started off with quite a lot of money in the account. We ran through about $250 overall can see there some of the things we spent our money on. Sorry, I should make this larger. There you go. Yeah, the flowers for Estelle, many of you will have known Estelle. She was very ill in hospital and it was decided to send her some flowers. Since the AGM, we took in about $180 in cash that night. We have just received the bills for Zoom for the last quarter of the year, which was $150 something. So we're kind of back where we started with this number here. So we've got almost $2,000 in the bank right now, which is very encouraging, but more donations are always very welcome, of course, because you never know what's going to come up. And I think we're very grateful to Harbourfront Centre for giving us a free meeting last time in November. But normally, of course, we would have to spend more on Zoom for the increased membership or increased attendance that they charge us extra for. So that was a bonus. Thank you.
So I remember when I was chair of YQNA, we would pass around the plate, as it were, and I would always compare it to church and say you really have to,
right,
put a few bucks in, or else you don't know what could happen.
Well, at the in-person meeting, we did have the famous box, and we did the cash contribution.
And my experience at Waterfront for All has been that it's a little bit harder to the technical, because there's no box going by, which you can just put 10 bucks in or something. People have to actually go online, and it's a little more complicated to donate. Can you explain to us exactly, however, how somebody would donate if they weren't inclined to do it?
Oh, absolutely. You just go to yqna.ca and hit the donate button. It's very simple, and then you put in your credit card information and the amount you would like to share with us, and you're done.
So I would urge everybody here to please do that at their earliest convenience.
And if you do, you get a personalized message of gratitude from me afterwards.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's excellent. So that's probably worth a lot right there, just to get it.
Thanks, everybody.
Carolyn. Okay, well, that brings us right up to almost 9 o'clock. And unless anybody has something urgent that they want to bring up at this point, I think I'll just thank everybody for their attention and for attending. And it's been great. The speakers were terrific. And thank you so much. And my understanding is that the next YQNA meeting will be on March 11th, 2025, presumably at 7 o'clock as well, also on Zoom, I guess. So we'll look forward to seeing you there. Thanks very much.